Welcome to the Being Known podcast with my friend, Dr. Kurt Thompson.
And my friend, Pepper Sweeney.
We are here to discover and explore what it means to be truly known. Welcome to our second episode of our third season of the Being Known podcast. I say that and I can't even believe that we're here already.
I know.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And it's been a joy. Thing. It's been a joy the entire time, I tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just, like we've often said, I just so look forward to having you all join us. And I just love recording this with you, Pep, and having Amy to, well, usually I enjoy having Amy around, but I mean, you know.
Yeah. In this season, we are looking at Kurt's book, which, as this season is coming to you, the book has been released. It's The Soul of Desire, Discovering the Neuroscience of Longing, Beauty, and Community. And what we're recommending that you get the book so that you can sort of follow along with us. And as you're listening to the podcast, we are chronologically going through the book. And I think it's a helpful companion to what you'll be reading.
Yeah, and so today we're actually, talking about this notion of beauty after last episode talking about desire and exploring this notion that, our desire is something that is innate to who we are, that we are kind of not just creatures of desire. It's not just that it's true about us, but we came into being as a product of God's desire. God had a desire to create us in beauty and goodness and joy, and if we are going to image God, if we are going to bear His image, then we also, as image bearers, we're going to express that desire and longing. And today we're going to wade right into where that longing and desire actually eventually manifests itself. We talked a bit last week about this notion of being known. We long to be seen and heard and understood, and we move toward this state of integration that we talked about a lot in the last season. But at the end of this sense, or as a process of this sense of being known, we discover that there is one more thing that we become aware of, that we are really longing for, that this process of being known leads us to, and we want to talk today about that, and this notion of beauty that begins with this question of what is the next artifact of beauty that you're longing to create? And how about you, Pep? What's the next artifact of beauty that you want to create?
It's a great question. There's a couple of things that that I'm working on. That I'm hoping to bring beauty to as a part of. There's a couple of there's one big event that I'm programming and directing that's going to be happening in November.
Okay, wait. So I'd love for you all to hear a little bit more about what Pepper does. So when you say that you're kind of directing and so forth, like what does it mean for you to, you have a program that you're going to be doing, and people might hear, oh, he's going to direct that, but name some things that might entail.
Well, it starts with just sort of brainstorming with the person that is the main talent, or the main, the main person that's going to be on stage, and coming up with a concept of a theme for what that event's going to be, and then programming with sort of story in mind. So you're programming an arc of an event. This particular event is 3 days. And there will be, there's music, and there's dance, and there's speaking, and there is an art element, and all kinds of different things. And so you're putting these things together so that there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you're building the whole experience to the main message that happens usually towards, you're picking things up all along the way to get you prepared for the main message that comes at the end. And then it's working with the technical people and the graphic designers and this day and age, you're using a lot of technology because a lot of these events are both live and virtual. So there's that aspect of things, which I thank goodness there are people that know how to push those buttons and do those things because, but it's being able to collaborate with them so that you can understand enough about the technology that you can bring special things to the event that you couldn't otherwise. And then it's bringing everybody together as a team and telling this story, with lights and sound and voice and dance and all the different things.
So I'm assuming that there are times when you're in the middle of these, both in terms of your preparation, but also in terms of the live production, that things go wrong. You ever run into trouble?
Yes.
No, you probably don't. You probably never have trouble.
Absolutely.
Your productions.
Flawless, seamless.
They're flawless. That's right.
Yes.
That's why you're working with me. I mean, because, I need somebody who can help this be flawless, given all the flaws that I'm going to bring to the table here. And I need somebody who can help make this,
Well, there's in almost every production, be it theatrical or whatever, there's a certain period of time where in rehearsal where you're going through and you're just thinking, and it's like clockwork, you're thinking, what are we doing? What am I, this is just awful. It's just terrible. And, who do I think I am? And, all those things. Right. And so you have to, in those moments when everybody's feeling it, you have to remain calm and push forward because you've been there before. So, you have to trust that, I've been there before. I know that this is that lull that we go through in the rehearsal period and we'll get to the other side of it and we'll discover things, that will help, the show be better and all that kind of stuff in the rehearsal process.
Right.
So that's that's a given.
Right.
And that's across the board. I think almost everybody that does any kind of theater or anything experiences that kind of feeling of, ugh,
right.
Why did I sign up for this?
Right. And the reason I'm bringing this up, our topic today is beauty, and we talk the title of the chapter of the book that we're exploring today is beauty, desire made manifest. This notion that our desire, our longing to be known, and that's all about, so much of that is about storytelling, which is exactly what you're talking about that you're doing with this production. And I'm just really struck by, right out of the gate as we're beginning to talk about this, this wasn't even planned for us to talk about this today. But I'm really struck by the notion that there you are, and as the kind of, in some respects, like the hub of this production, directing it and so forth, bringing together all these different things. It is this beautiful way. You're not just earning a living. Of course, it earns you a paycheck, but like in your soul, you are helping to create beauty in the world, and you're doing so by bringing together multiple different domains of activity, whether it's the dancers, whether it's the speakers, whether it's the art, whether the technician, the technology, all the things. And we know that this won't be perfect. We know that things are going to go wrong. We know that we're going to reach a point where we are asking, like, what are we doing here? And, those are points that we would say, well, yeah, we all reach that. We reach those points in just about every domain of life. In our marriages, in our parenting, in our jobs, in our friendships, in our churches, there are ways in which we're all having these moments like, what are we doing? which is really not a question. Really, it's the statement underneath that that says, like, I don't know what I'm doing. I have all the feelings of like I'm so not up for this. I'm not adequate for this. All the things that evil would want to be saying to us in order to truncate, in order to shear off this manifestation of our desire, which is to create. We want to make things in the world. And in the process of making things, as we talked about this process of integration before last season, I think about how integration is really what's taking place as you make this production. And we talk about this notion of growth as human beings includes, and I talk about this a little bit more in detail in the book, this notion that from the time we're born to the time that we get older, we are growing in our capacity to tolerate distressing emotional states. This window of tolerance that we are expanding, that we're growing in our resilience. We are knowing, like you said, like you know it's going to happen. It's almost like clockwork. You know it. And the other folks in this production who haven't been around, they look to you, like at some point, somebody's looking to you because like you can say, yep, this is what is to be expected. Almost, I mean, you know, there is a sense in which when Jesus says to his disciples, in this world, you're going to have tribulation. He might as well be saying like, it's like clockwork. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid. In fact, be of good cheer. We're going to continue to, like, you're going to ask the question, what am I doing here? Like, which is what this one particular couple, Graham and Carmen, were asking when they came in to see me for marriage work. And of course, all they can see is the trouble in their life, and each one of them was pointing to the other as the source of it. And just like all of us can point to the trouble in my life, and some of it has to do with my own behavior, but we often are like, I'm pointing to somebody else that's the source of this. And I know that one of the first questions that I asked them was, what's the next new artifact of beauty that you want to create? And of course, they're looking at me like, what the heck? Like, I'm not here, like, this doesn't make any sense.
Well, I have to say, I read that in the book, and I felt the same way. I'm like,
right, exactly.
Well, how can you ask these people that question?
Right.
I mean, you're coming in for help.
All right. I should have been speaking in French to them, and they didn't know French. It would have been easier for them to understand what I was asking. But this is the point. This notion that we see a lot of our life through the lens of it being a problem that has to be solved. We sense and feel our brokenness, but we therefore don't see or miss out on this sense that Jesus is always in the business of coming back around and saying, what is the new thing that you want to create? Because I know that even in this space that feels so broken, this question of new creation is always waiting in the wings. It's always standing, right by your side, waiting for you to like look it square in the face. And we're not going to come up with this on our own because for Carmen and Graham, like things were like, they were a mess. And so the whole notion of thinking creatively is kind of like imagining, oh, would you like to paint with me today while you're having morning sickness with your pregnancy? Nobody, when you're sick, when things are upsetting, the notion of being creative actually requires the presence of an outside source to draw our attention to that. We're suggesting here, though, that if it's true that desire ultimately leads to beauty, we then start to wonder, well, what is that beauty really like? And what are some ways that it manifests? And there are three words that, for me, I usually use to talk about it. This topic of beauty has been written about by philosophers and artists and people who are far more authoritative on the subject than I am. But the three words that I think about that come to me, the first is wonder. This notion that when you encounter beauty in many respects, you're just captivated. You're captivated by it. I tell the story of how the first time that when my wife and I and our kids came to the south rim of the Grand Canyon, it was and it was so overwhelming I could barely look at it. It almost started to feel painful. Like the wonder of it was just too much. And the second thing then that we would say, the beauty welcomes us. Beauty says, "Come on in the room. Have a sit down." Like if you can stand it, please come in. Beauty welcomes us. And so it's wonder, it's welcome. It doesn't look at us and say, only no, only a few get to see this. Only a few get to, no. It was made for us. So it's wonder, it's welcome, and then it's this notion of worship. This notion that I encounter beauty. I encounter a Mark Rothko painting. I encounter, what was the name of the bird that you were talking about before we started the tape? Outside your window?
The rose-breasted grosbeak. Rose-breasted.
Okay.
Say it 5 times.
I can say that I can't say that. I can say that I can't say it. I've never actually heard of that bird before, let alone seen that bird before. I can only imagine, but I would invite you all to go look it up and see what it's like. But this whole notion that we see the bird and we're like, it's pointing to something else. Something's got to be behind this. And this notion of worship, that beauty draws me to the worship of something. Now, of course, my problem is that I see that bird and I want to put it in a cage. I want to have it in my house so that I can see it anytime I want to. Or I don't just want to go visit the Rothko or the Van Gogh painting. I want it in my house. I don't just desire beauty. I want to devour it. I want to own it. I want to clutch it. It's some of my challenge. And of course, this is what was happening for Carmen and Graham. This notion of clutching and hoarding the things about their own story and their own brokenness that was creating a rather disintegrating state of affairs in their marriage, rather seeing their marriage as a studio in which we are going to create beauty such that everyone else can come and see the beauty that God is creating in this marriage. You know, in the last few years, I've been introduced to the work of a Catholic theologian by the name of Hans Urs von Balthasar. And there's a mouthful. And I can say that because he's deceased and he won't come and strike me. But, this von Balthasar is generally considered by many to be one of the most influential and important Catholic theologians of the 20th century. And you begin to read his writings, or in my case, reading Aidan Nichols, who is the British priest who interprets von Balthasar, because reading von Balthasar himself is just it's way above my pay grade. But von Balthasar talks about this notion of, in philosophy, or at least in the West, in philosophy, we like to talk about what we call the transcendentals. It's a fancy schmancy philosophical term that means those things that are fundamental for us as human beings. And they talk about the 3 transcendentals as being truth, goodness, and beauty. And in the West, we've often talked about them in that order. That first we think things, and then once we have thought about something enough, then we know it can be good because we've thought it through, because first I think and therefore I am, right?
Right.
That Descartes,
René Descartes, yes. I could.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, of course. There's a French word I could have said to Carmen and Graham and they might have noticed, right?
Yes, yeah.
Exactly.
Sacre bleu.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, I think we're done here. My work is done here. My work is done here.
Come on, get the train back on the rails.
All right. So here's the thing. So you've got this huge Western philosophical tradition that basically says first we think through the world so that we know what's true.
Right.
And that will tell us what is good. And then when we know something is good, then that qualifies it for being beautiful. First there's truth, then there's goodness, then there's beauty. And von Balthasar comes along and says, no, that's backwards. Von Balthasar says, first you encounter beauty. And once we encounter beauty, the very sense of it tells us of its goodness. And its goodness actually leads us to truth. And what's so striking to me is that this is exactly how the brain works. First we sense, and then we make sense of what we sense. In our life, I don't know that there is a more beautiful passage of Scripture than the first 18 verses of the first chapter of John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word. I mean, it's prose, but it's poetic. How did this guy come up with this? And we preach this from pulpits. We teach this in seminaries. We write about it in commentaries. We want to know that this is true. But the thing is, Pep, when we read, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten Son of the Father, full of grace and truth. Before John could write what we read, he first had to have an encounter with Jesus, who was doing the dwelling with the disciples. They first must actually behold and touch his glory, and then write about it. First we sense, and then we make sense of what we sense. And we want to be formed in that same way, that image of Jesus in concert with the way that God's actually made our minds and our brains to work. Evil doesn't want this happening. It turns out that Carmen and Graham can't begin to heal first just by us getting them to change the way they think. They first have to change literally in what they sense. They have to have a sense that each of them, and in this case, through an outside mediator, it happened to be me, it could have been someone else is drawing their attention to beauty even before they know that's what's happening. And the beauty that is being drawn out of them is the beauty even of empathy, the beauty of being seen and soothed and safe and secure. Beauty comes to our rescue because when you put it in the room, it then gives our thinking brains the chance to catch up. Which is why it takes change so long to happen. Why we can know something, like I can know something theologically. You know, we ask, I'm 50, I'm almost 59. I'm more like, why is it taking me so long to change? There are things that I know that I want to be, things that I know that I want to do, that I don't do, things that I don't want to do, that I do. I can know these things as facts, but it's taking a long time for me to catch up because, frankly, there are still parts of me that have yet viscerally not beheld the glory of Jesus. And by glory, I don't just mean his fantabulous appearance. I mean the glory of his loving me, the glory of our being loved. We need more practice with that kind of beauty, beginning with empathy as an example, that sees the beauty in us that it wants to call forth, just like we were having to do with Carmen and Graham. And in so doing, giving them this sense of like, oh my goodness, beauty now becomes something that I can create, but it's also something that I'm longing to become.
Yeah, you know, when you were talking about changing, you know, people would say, boy, you've changed. And I sure hope so. You know, I sure hope so. And I hope the next time that we meet, I've changed again. And I hope it continues and continues, right? Because that's the journey. Now, one thing I wanted to remind you of is in the first season, when you described beauty and we were talking through it, you added another W to it. And I think it's apropos here, and that was work, if you remember. Yeah. Because, you know, Carmen and Graham, you know, in order to even, you know, start to listen to you talking about beauty and, you know, thinking that this was a journey that they wanted to go on, that required work for them to experience the beauty.
Well, you know, we've used this example before, but we've used it on maybe even more than once here on the show. You all have heard Pepper talk about his, you know, the acting moment where you were the, you know, grocery delivery guy, and
we've gotten a lot out of this story.
I know we have, but I mean, I go back to this because I want to emphasize that you walked onto the stage and the director noticed that something was different, and that something different required micro-moment, persevering practice in your mind and with your body over and over and over again that actually then displayed itself on the stage without anybody else in the house knowing what had happened. Maybe not even the actors that you were working with, but somebody sees this because your embodied presence is doing the work. This kind of work that we talk about that is related, we think is really, in many respects, what artistic expression is about. We talk about how I've read where the greatest poetry is written by those who write the most poetry. Because so much of what they write, they would say it's not very good and they don't keep it, but they're working really hard at honing their craft, at being present with this perseverance that St. Paul writes about in Romans 5, but we're going to persevere even in the face of suffering. And that beauty emerges in the face of this kind of work with us. I think the other thing that we like to focus on is this notion that it emerges in us not just because we do the work, but it emerges in us because we are actually doing this work as it's being called out of us. With Carmen and Graham, that work that they wanted to do to create beauty in their marriage was not going to happen very easily unless they had an outside brain that was working with them. How many of us, I want to learn to paint. Well, I'm not just going to paint. I'm going to need to take a class in which somebody else is going to help me do this. I mean, you've taught acting, you've directed people. I think about the amount of work that you've done as a director. I would love to, I don't know if you have any stories, but stories about what it's like for you to watch a moment emerge in which somebody has acted in a way that is directly related to the work you've done as a director. I wonder if you can speak to that.
Well, yeah, it's actually one of the most sort of satisfying things that you can experience, or that I've experienced professionally. There have been a couple of different times where I've worked with someone and they would just have a thing, particularly of a guy who was just having a block and he couldn't get past this thing, and I would just come over and I like to have private conversations with the actors, kind of pull them aside and
private as in kind of away from the other folks that are on the set?
Yeah. Whisper in their ears encouragement or whatever, It's just something that I learned along the way that I think is effective. And then to watch that this guy just blossom and come out of what was blocking him and to just hit a home run at the end of it is it's hugely satisfying.
Right.
Yeah.
And in many respects, it is a reminder to us that beauty that we create is as much something that emerges because somebody else is involved in calling it forth, and that it does require work, but that the work that we produce also then becomes the opportunity for others to find themselves being drawn to the wonder, find themselves being drawn to the welcome, and having their attention directed toward worship. And so, one of the things as you all are listening, I think about, the question of where are the places in our lives, where are the places in your lives where you long to create beauty? And you might think, well, Kurt, I don't really think of that. That's not what I don't think very much about that. And I would say, especially in those parts of your life where you're wishing life could be different. And you would say, well, yeah, that's the part that I would least expect beauty to emerge. And so I would say, so in your marriage, or with your child, or in your work, there is this place of longing for us to be curators and creators of beauty. And this is, in the spirit of Mako Fujimura's work, this notion that he wrote about in Culture Care, and what he's most recently written in Art and Faith, A Theology of Making, this notion that we are to be generative, just like in the Genesis account. We are to be generative. We are to be people of new creation. And that new creation comes especially in those places where we would least expect it, because it feels so barren, perhaps, or it feels so broken. But, Pep, that's not how it starts. Because when we talk about beauty and artistic creation, all we have to do is look at children. We don't start by looking at us as adults. All we have to do is look at children. Children invariably make stuff, right? Yeah. As soon as they can put things in their hands and hold them with their newly developing opposable thumbs, they're making stuff. And, you know, they don't first begin just by making, you know, they don't begin with imaginary things, right? They're not first like writing novels.
Right.
They're making things out of little stuff. They're making mud pies. They're making, you know, you name it. I mean, you have children. I mean, your kids, you were just talking about how your kids are still making things.
Yeah. Yes. It's, I remember just, you know, that experience as a parent where, you know, your son or your daughter would be drawing something, you know, and just wanting to bring it to you and wanting to see that expression in your face of, you know, this is wonderful, this is beautiful. And then, of course, they're always waiting for you to put it up on the fridge because that was kind of the ring of honor, right? You hang it up there, and then it's really a piece of art. And then when your spouse comes home, you point it out and you say, "Look what Coleman made! Look what Hannah made!" You know, and call them out and tell them how beautiful it is and all that kind of thing. So yeah, and you know, during the worst part of the pandemic. My kids, the older two, don't live in the house anymore, but they all came home and they were here during that time, and you know, they turned my back furnace room in the basement into an art studio, and
Amazing.
they had a. It's funny because one side of the room has got a punching bag and weights, and the other side of the room had easels and oil paints, and they would sit down there and I think it was a way for them to, you know, because it was an anxious time for all of us, and you know, not knowing what was going to happen and being isolated and all of that, and just for them a way for them to connect with one another and to create beauty separately and together and to share that with each other and with us was pretty awesome.
Right. Well, you know, one of the next things that we talk about with children, like children have this impulse to do this, to create things, to make things. And there is this trajectory of they make something, and it's invariably something that is embodied, right? It's material. It's, you know, it's crayons on a paper.
Yeah.
It's something they've glued together.
Yeah.
There is a thing that you can touch and feel and sense and show to somebody else. And it's a tribute, I think, to this notion that beauty is not an abstraction. Beauty is this thing that we are just designed to, and there's no guile, there's no embarrassment. It's just comfort and confidence that they bring you this thing, right? Daddy, look what I made you, right? They're not wondering, like, is he going to like this? Is this good enough? You know, I was spending some time with Mako Fujimura a couple of years ago, and we were talking about the work of people like Jackson Pollock and others who have done kind of abstract work, and you know, the common conversation that will sometimes show up with people who would say, well, like, oh, my 3-year-old could do that. And one of the things that Mako pointed out, he said, you're right, your 3-year-old could do that, but could you do that? And he said, I'll never forget this, Mako said, one of the things about adults is that we have so worked our way into self-consciousness and self-condemnation that really begins to take root, depending upon our stories, begins to take root around the time we reach like 2nd or 3rd grade. When the learning process for many of us now gets spliced together with the anxiety of having to like perform well enough, something that you weren't really doing when you were in kindergarten and for many when they were in 1st grade. But I have to perform well enough. And by the time I'm an adult, if someone were to just hand me a paintbrush and say, well, hey, just there's a blank canvas, go at it. The first thing I'm going to think is like, what am I doing here, right? This is like no, I don't know. I can't paint. So I'm so self-conscious that as much as I like to think that I could do what my 3-year-old can do, like, I can't do that. In fact, it takes work to peel off my layers of shame and self-consciousness that my wounding and unfinished business has elicited in me in order to get to a place where I could just start to throw paint around and not care a whit, but expect that somebody's going to come in and they're going to see it and they're going to sense that just because it's there and I did it, they want to put it on their fridge. And when Jesus says, unless you change and become like little children, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven, this is just one more way, it seems to me, that beauty is echoing his call. Beauty is saying, until and or unless you can receive me and engage in the creation of the material world with the expectation that you want to show it to somebody else, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. Not even a matter of like, you're not allowed in, as much as a matter of like, it's going to be hard to survive here because this is how it's going to be. We're going to ask people to be so immersed in beauty that you are unashamed of, even in the places in your relationships, Carmen and Graham, that feel the hardest. We want you to know that beauty is coming for you. And that for you thing then is this next thing, right? This notion that children make these things out of material work, and they're made to be beautiful, even at this young age, right? They think like this, it's Van Gogh to them. Like, and there's a price to be paid for this, right? And they want it to be displayed in public, which is why it goes on the refrigerator, right? And there'll be more people. And in so doing, you, the parent, you expand their window of tolerance to help them be more comfortable with other people paying attention to them and their work. But the next thing we see is that this work of art becomes itself a conduit for relationship. They bring it to you, and you're looking at them, and they're looking at you, and the painting, this crayon on paper, becomes this way that God uses to draw us to each other. So we start with this longing to be known in order to create beauty, only to find that the beauty itself draws us further into being known, in order for us then to become that very thing that we're creating. We'll talk more about that in our next episode, this notion that God is not just in the business of having us make things like He made them. He's longing for us to become the beauty that He imagines, that is foreshadowed by the beauty that we are creating here on the earth. And one of the ways that artists are so helpful for us is that they help us by drawing our attention to beauty, things that we often don't pay attention to, in order to draw our attention to what we long to become. You know, one of the...
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I remember the first time that I ever really sat in front of a painting. Like, and it was you who led... we had a... it was a Rothko, and...
it's in my office right now. It's the painting. Right, number 61.
Yes. Yep. And I was, first I was willing, but it was also, I look up and I see this thing and I'm like, okay, what's going to happen? It's a couple of stripes and it's, and I remember sitting and having an emotional experience with this. And it's been something that I've done several times since, but that discovering of beauty and feeling a connectedness to it, right? And I, not having any idea what the intention of the artist was,
right,
but still having an experience of my own in that moment,
right. Well, that sense that we might not even know explicitly yet what the artist's intention is, but that notion of wonder and then welcome, we get a sense that even if I don't know explicitly, to be welcomed, like who doesn't want to be welcomed? Like genuinely. I mean, this is why art can bring people to tears, because it touches the parts of us that for so long have not felt welcomed. The parts of us, as you all are listening, that still feel broken, that still feel pushed to the outside, that feel scapegoated. The broken parts, the parts that we've kind of exiled. And so it calls to us. It reminds us then that it's not good for us to be alone. Beauty itself is calling to the new creation. It's calling those parts that have been traumatized and where shame resides in order to make sure that it's not left there. And, we really need each other in order for this to happen. We see at the dawn of creation that God made them male and female, right? I don't just get to do life on my own. I do life with others who are different from me. I need somebody else to help pull the beauty out of me, to call it forth. The stories that I've learned in writing this book, one was, I learned that, Johann Sebastian Bach, who is considered to be the father of classical music, and for many, he's like the hard deck on which all music in the West kind of rises from. Come to find out that his work had kind of been hidden back in the shadows until Felix Mendelssohn comes along some 100 years later and discovers it and starts to play it. And then Pablo Casals, the great cellist, comes and starts to play his cello pieces again, and it opens Bach to the world. Like Bach needed Mendelssohn and Casals. And in the same way that Roger Fry, the great English art critic, found Van Gogh's work that was a bit languishing. It was known on the continent, but not known in the West very far, in the English-speaking world. And because of Roger Fry, we now have Van Gogh to the extent that we do. We need each other in the way that Bach needed Mendelssohn, that Van Gogh needed Roger Fry, and that I need you, and that we need Amy. And that Amy needs us, and that we need our kids, and our kids need us. And it's fair to say that in this grand project of desire to create beauty and to emerge as beauty in our own lives, that evil very much intends to use trauma and shame to keep that from happening. And so even as y'all are listening today, some of you might find it kind of hard to connect the dots. Like, I don't know, Kurt, yeah, I guess I could go to a museum, I guess I could look online, but how's this make any difference? I want to invite you to be hopeful. I want you to look to where we will be going next. I know that it's easy, as Ian McGilchrist points out in The Master and His Emissary, that culture itself is... It easily wants to denigrate beauty. It easily wants to just have us push it off and say, oh, beauty is just an extra. It's just, an add-on, and it's an accessory. But the biblical narrative would suggest that beauty is actually necessary for our survival, let alone our flourishing. Evil doesn't want us to find out that piece of information because, as we've said before, the moment that we begin to pay attention to beauty, evil will perk up its ears because it will know that its days are numbered. And for those of us who long for beauty to emerge in the hardest places of your lives this morning, we want you to know that God's intention is for you to become the very beauty of which we speak. And to become so in a way that you yourself will eventually find unrecognizable, but in a way that will be irresistibly attractive, not for consumption, not for devouring, but for wonder and welcome and worship. Thanks be to God.
Yes. Kurt, this has been great. And I think that the one thing that I'm really enjoying is having the opportunity to read along with this. It gives me a better understanding of the work that you've done in the book. I'm really grateful that you've written the book and you've done this work. It's beautiful. It really is beautiful.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I look forward to next week. We'll continue our conversation on beauty next week. And do you want to give a little bit of a what's going to be happening next week?
Sure. So, we've talked a little bit today about some fundamentals about beauty and how it's inherent. It shows up in human development. It shows up with children. It's just a natural outgrowth of how we operate in the world. And in our next episode, we're going to talk about how it's actually, it is that because it's a natural outgrowth of what it means for God to be himself. That the Holy Trinity couldn't help but create beauty and couldn't help but making us to be his image bearers in such a way that we do that. And so we're going to talk more about what it's like for God to be delighted in the beauty that he has made, in the beauty that he wants to co-create with us in the world, and how that will speak powerfully, ultimately, into the lives of Carmen and Graham and so many others.
Awesome. I can't wait. Thanks for this time, Kurt.
Thanks, Pep. Till next
ya.
time. Love you too.
Okay, I had two thoughts. Well, I had more than two thoughts, but one of them was, Kurt, you mentioned in the book, you mentioned hypo and hyper arousal. And as those being intolerable emotional states.
Right.
And that stood out to me because, like, with Carmen and Graham, like the question, what's the next thing of beauty that you want to create? It feels like an interruption. It feels like, no. My left brain wants to solve this problem. We have a problem. And these hypo and hyper arousal states of being anxious and restless or depressed and fatigued, it seems so contrary to like what I want to do. I don't want to interrupt it. The thought does not cross my mind, oh, I am going to focus on beauty. I need to solve this first.
Right. Yeah, and if we have more time, we could cover that. I think that one of the things that we, and I think in the introduction, I talk about a person who had been rather reluctant to enter into any number of the things that I'd asked him to do. And so I thought, I'm going to give him this work of Rembrandt to just start to pay attention to. And of course, this was rather off-putting to him because of all the things that I so far was suggesting that he do that he wasn't willing to do, this seemed to be, this is like Naaman and Elisha. If you know this story in the Old Testament, where Elisha says, "Yeah, go dunk 7 times in the Jordan River," and Naaman is scandalized. Like, what do you mean? How dare you? And I think what it points out is that, not unlike Pepper, you're describing the experience with Rothko. This idea, like, well, what am I doing here? We enter into this like, well, what am I doing here? And one of the things that beauty does, of course, if we're willing to allow ourselves to be captivated by it, beauty actually can bring us out of those hyper or hypo-aroused states and bring us back into a window of tolerance wherein which we then had greater capacity to begin to name things that we feel without leaving those windows of tolerance, without over or under reacting to things. And eventually that's part of how we began to do some work with them, because I think, as I point out later, there are some literature pieces that I began to invite them to look at, to begin to read, as a way to, like, when you're reading Flannery O'Connor, you find that there are things about those stories that are just so resonant. Like, she doesn't hold anything back. Like, there's nothing that she doesn't talk about, all from the perspective of beauty, right? All from the perspective that, like, behind all of this is the Trinity that's coming for us, the Trinity that is in the presence, that is doing the work to the degree that we're allowed and we're willing to let them do the work. And so it's also equally true that my patient from the introduction would not have, on his own accord, thought, like, I think I'm going to go look at Rembrandt.
Right.
No, he's not going to do that. It does require an outside brain. And in many respects, we talk about those children that bring us artwork. They do so from a place of being seen, soothed, safe, and secure. Right? They're going to do so because the environment that they live in has created a space for them that enables them to do that. And so when people are either hypo or hyper aroused, it's necessary for an outside brain to be present with them, to draw them to beauty. And in some respects, a simple moment of empathic connection is the kind of beauty that they need, that can quiet them enough or arouse them enough to let them then take a greater look of clarity at the story that they've been telling themselves.
You had a second point, Amy, that you wanted to bring up.
Yes, and that was when you guys were talking about Maku and the idea that some people say, well, my 3-year-old could do that. And his response is, well, could you do that? And it made me think of those, you know, how kids can, it's usually kids, go to those places. I think one of them is called We Create, where they go in and they get pottery and they can paint it and they do this. And I told a friend, I said, I want to create a We Create for adults, where you go in, it's just this big warehouse with a canvas, and you just have paint you have all these materials, and you can just abandon all and create. And it's that breaking away from all of the things that hold us back and foster that creativity.
Right. Well, you know, Pep, I'm really, you know, one thing that really, you talk about the work aspect of this too. Like, I'm back to your story about longing to audition for the Miami production of Hair.
Right.
And like, so, you know, rewind the tape to a year prior to that and think like, well, if that company had written and said like, hey, you know, we've got openings, like, would that have been something that you would have wanted to do?
It would have been the absolute last thing that I would have ever done.
Right. But I'm sure that in many respects, that year of work strengthened your capacity, like brought you to a greater state of integration that led you then to your next stage of development of creativity. Because I love that notion of, you know, I mean, to audition for something that big, I mean, that's significant. Like it takes like chutzpah. I mean, you got to have courage to do this. And I'm just really struck by this notion of how you're being received, welcomed. I mean, you know, Bert saw in you. I mean, he saw something, right? This whole, like, just imagine, you've got this guy who does what he does with the song and dance. He's got that song and dance number that he does.
Right.
But even there, Bert sees something. He sees something that he calls forth into the next day, where the acting takes place. And in many respects, I mean, this is what Jesus does, right? He sees things, and he calls them forth, and he says, "I want you back here tomorrow. I want you back here tomorrow." Like, who? And you're like, what was that like for you when he said, "Come back tomorrow"?
Well, I'll tell you, you know, so just because we were talking about this kind of off camera, and just
recap.
I don't want to tell the whole story, but I was auditioning for a school to get in after I graduated college, and it was a school that the actor Burt Reynolds owned and ran, and they only took 12 people out of the country. In the whole country. Out
of how many like applicants? Approximately.
Hundreds. I don't know the, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There wasn't. Yeah, there were not 14 applicants.
13.
No, they were not.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the audition consisted of 2 days. The first day was dance, jazz, tap, and ballet, and the second day and then singing 16 bars of a song, and then the second day was acting. And I really literally had I had no business being in the room with these dancers and these singers. I can't dance and I can't sing a lick. And I had to do it in front of this panel of judges that were, you know, Broadway choreographers and agents and casting directors. And movie stars and all this. And I literally at one point in the ballet slammed into the wall. I mean, I'm so out of my element. I feel bad for everybody else that was in the room auditioning, because the whole panel is not watching them at all. They're watching me and laughing so hard they can't control themselves. So then I had to come in and sing, and that was just a disaster, because I was so anxious and nervous that as soon as the music started playing, my brain just completely went blank. I couldn't remember the words to Mac the Knife, which was kind of a funny song to pick in the first place. But, so that was just, so I was going to leave that day and not come back the next day. I mean, I just was, there was just not a chance. And as I was leaving, I heard a voice saying, "Hey, Pepper." And I turned around and it was Burt Reynolds. And he said, through that wry smile that he always had, he said, "Robert Redford can't sing and dance either, but you sure as hell better be able to act." He said, "Come back tomorrow. We want you back here tomorrow." And that was enough to bring me back. I got in the program, and it changed the trajectory of my life. It really did.
Yeah.
It was an amazing year.
I wonder, did you ever, I don't know if you ever did have an opportunity to just ask him, like, what was it that you saw? Like, what got your attention that said, well, no, we want this guy to come back?
He did express to me at one point, he said, you had the best attitude. And you were working hard, but not taking yourself real seriously. And then he said, "We just saw something in you. We just saw something in you that we all, to a person, just really, liked and wanted to see what you could do." And I came back the next day and was able to do a monologue that was thankfully good enough to get me in the room. So
yeah. Well, I really appreciate that story in how we each routinely need other people to see something in us that we do not see. You think about, the stories told of Michelangelo, who would talk about, he doesn't create the sculpture. He sees it in the rock, and his role is to release it from the marble. That he's not creating something as much as he's just revealing something. I think about the ways that in many respects when Jesus says, "You're the light of the world." I think I've said this here on our show before. I hear him say, "You're the light of the world." Who would put the light candle put under a basket? And I hear him say, "Kurt, you're the light of the world. Don't screw it up." When in effect, is he also perhaps not really saying, "Amy, you are so illuminating. You're just so unbelievably illuminating." I mean, I wouldn't say that about Pepper, even though he is the most beautiful man in the world. Because Pepper already knows this, right? It's just, he doesn't need to be told. But this sense of if somebody were to say this to me, I'm like, that it's like, I have this mixed feeling of that's uncomfortable. Because, and at the same time, there is this deep well that is being, that's being called to, right? Deep calls to deep. This felt sense of oh my gosh, you really, you see me, right? This is Hagar in the desert. Behold the God who sees me. And our being seen in a way that we can't see ourselves. For Carmen and Graham to be able to see each other in ways that the other can't see themselves required eventually that Carmen herself and Graham himself needed to be seen separately by someone else, so that their awareness of beauty emerging in their own life began to give them a foothold that they could stand on, that could enable them to turn to their spouse and begin to see the same thing in their spouse. Because we can't give what we don't have. And in many respects, then, the question is, who are the people that are seeing beauty emerge in us, and who are the people for whom we are doing the same? Where is the beauty that we are looking for and calling forth in others? Where are we perhaps able to be the Michelangelos in our world of just releasing the marble from the block?
Ooh, that makes me think of a friend of mine who is a fabulous singer. And one time I said, "Who told you could sing?" And she told me about her sister who told her she could sing, and she's a fabulous singer. And it's like, that makes me think, okay, we can look for the beauty in others and tell them they can sing.
Right.
And then see them sing, because they're like, well, somebody told me I could, so I can.
Well, when someone asks me the question, "Who told you could sing?" I take it a little differently.
I want to talk to them.
Exactly. I'm waiting for the shoe to drop, because you should not.
Oh, my gracious.
Look for beauty in the week in others.
Well, I'm wondering if there's, as we, kind of bring our time to any other thoughts, reflections, stories that come to mind for either of you that have been prompted as we've had our conversation today. It's okay if not.
I mean, I have a story about, well, I don't know how much time we have. Do we have like 3 minutes?
Sure. Like, you're in charge. Like,
oh, yay.
If you remember.
If I was paying attention. I was paying attention, just not to my task. A friend of ours, has a little boy and a little girl who I adore and have a tremendous relationship with them. And this is in line of kids creating because they want to give it. So the little boy, Elliot, he was 7, and he perler beads. Do those mean anything to you? They're little tiny beads that you arrange and then you into a shape, and then you iron them to melt them into a thing.
Yes.
So I just love this story. Chickens are my thing. I have a thing for chickens. Different story. And
that's a very different story.
Not really.
I mean, remember, you're talking to a psychiatrist, so now I'm like, okay.
I'm gonna let you wonder.
Okay.
So we were making perler bead things, and Elliot's over there working, and I look over, and he said, "Mamie, I'm making a turkey." I said, "Oh." I said, "Great." So we did our thing. I don't do the pressing; somebody else does. So we're done. Then Christmas comes around, and this will make me cry, Ken. So then in this package that he had wrapped with painter's tape, and
did you say with painter's tape?
Painter's tape, yeah. It's fabulous. I have a picture of it. I open, and I'm like, what could this be? He's 7. And I open it up, and there's a little perler bead chicken, and there's a card that says, "Mamie, it's not a turkey. It's a chicken." And he was so excited to give this to me. And I was elated, not only because of the chicken that he created for me, but that he thought to tell me I'm making a turkey. So that
to throw you off the course.
Yeah. So you don't even pay attention because you don't like turkey. You're not going to.
Oh, my gracious.
That's great.
Well, I mean, I even think about that thing about like this notion of wonder, right? That part of wonder is like that we get surprised by things, right? You come upon something, you get surprised, and like even there, Elliot is like part of the joy is the surprise of the thing that he's made.
Look
and
what I'm
knowing that
doing.
he's hoodwinked you.
Totally hoodwinked me.
Yes. Man,
awesome.
That is awesome. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to a next recording and really wandering a bit more into this notion of how God like really senses and feels this beauty and longs for us to become that. And I'm just really aware of how the way I tell my story often and the things, my own story of unfinished business and brokenness and so forth often has me looking at the world and telling a very different story from moment to moment to moment. Now, if I pause long enough, maybe I'll take 30 seconds and think about that and be aware of that, and then I go right back to seeing the world as, this wilderness that I have to survive, without remembering that God's intention is to, all along the way, even though I see, hard things, beauty is what's coming. It's funny. I'll just tell this story. So last Thursday, as I think I mentioned to you all last week when we were recording, it was verified that we had a tornado that came through our neighborhood. And the path was about 2 blocks north of our home, and I think the winds were clocked at like 90 miles an hour. And I'm thinking, like, I wonder who the dude is who's out there standing in the street with a little meteorological device that's measuring the wind, the wind velocity. Who's doing this?
Trying to take cover and be like,
I'm thinking about his umbrella on the Weather Channel. It's like, so about a block from here, there's our home kind of sits on a flat. Our block is on a bit of a flat area. But west of here, as soon as you go half a block west from here, this used to be farmland. The whole area, you realize you're kind of on a bit of a knoll. It kind of drops off on a hill. And, there's several streets for which all the houses then are built. It's not a real steep hill, but you can tell. And every single time we have a bad storm that comes from the west, the wind comes up through the channels of those streets coming up the hill. And you figure that, like, in order to get over the hill, it starts to accelerate. Mm-hmm. And on at least 2 occasions, and it happened again here, there's a home about a block from here where there is this mighty maple tree that's probably, it's somewhere between 80 and 120 years old. That's got a trunk, that is 5 feet in diameter, 4 to 5 feet in diameter. And, the way the wind worked, it took the tree and it pulled it up by its roots.
Oh my gosh.
And the tree comes across the entire street, lands on power lines, drops a transformer onto a woman's car, And now, and so here's the strange thing. So it took them 2.5 days to clear this. But now when you walk by, like there as much as you look at it and you think carnage, like you think like, oh my gosh, like this is what happened. You also see that maple with its, it's just laying over, like the top, 30 feet of it is still intact, but the whole root system is pulled up. It's just in the front, like you can't see the front of the house now because the root system is probably about 7 to 8 feet high. And there is this unbelievable and like unmistakable beauty in just contending with the power that is in that felled tree. And I want to say, like, no one, fortunately no one was injured, and people will get their places repaired and so forth. But I want to say that even in hard places and tragic moments, God is already in the business of drawing our eyes to see beauty even in the middle of carnage. And I know that if you're the family that lives in that home, you open your front door and you don't see anything of the street because all you see is an uprooted root system of this great and mighty maple tree.
Right.
And you are simultaneously made aware of the beauty and the grandeur and the power of our Creator, and that power is represented in His desire to know us and to be known by Him, and that the strength of that wind that took that tree over is the same strength that wants to know us even more intensely, with even, if you can think about an intensity of kindness that Jesus brings to the table in our being known, because he's so serious about the beauty that he wants to create, which we'll be talking more about next week.
That's great. You know, the last, so my dad passed away just before he would have turned 91 on the 6th of July, and he passed away just before his 90th birthday. On his 90th birthday, a wind shear came through and pulled a tree down on my mom's front yard last year.
Wait. You
On
mean
his
last
birthday.
year?
Last year, on his birthday, 2 days after he died, or a couple days after he died, a little bit long, but a couple weeks, and on his birthday. And this year, my mom called me up the day after my dad's birthday, and she said, "Did you guys lose any trees in that storm last night?" I said, "We didn't have a storm last night." I'm 3-4 miles from her.
This is like last week. I mean, this is like
just here. She says
2 days ago or whatever.
Yeah. She said,
3 or 4 miles from her.
Yeah, she said, "You didn't have a storm?" I said, "No, we didn't get a drop of rain or anything." She said, "There are trees down all over on my street."
Get out.
Not in her yard. She didn't lose any this time, but right across the street, one went down over somebody's car, another, and I didn't have anything. It was very isolated in that, anyway, I just, your story.
Now it's on his birthday.
It was on his birthday again
He
next
called
year,
after.
so
Wow.
I'm taking cover next July.
That's right.
Cover it next.
That's right. That's right. Your dad he wants people to know your dad is still in the neighborhood.
He is still, yeah.
And powerful.
Like you said, Kurt, he's still in the room.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, he is.
All right, guys.
Right on.
I love you guys. I look forward to next week.
I look forward to
All right.
reading the next chapter. I'm going to keep up.
Cool.
That's how I'm going to keep up with the,
Yep.
Cool.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
So,
All right.
thanks, guys. All right.
Talk soon. See ya.
Bye.
This podcast is produced by Kurt Thompson, Pepper Sweeney, and myself, Amy Chella. Audio production and editing is by Keaton Simons. Video production and editing is done by Mark Gould. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on social media at Being Known Pod. If you like this podcast, tell a friend. If you love this podcast, tell everyone you know. And please like, rate, and review wherever you listen. Be well, be known.